Hi there, I'm Tom Field. I'm Senior Vice President of Editorial with Information Security Media Group. I really want to welcome you to this session today entitled The Big Shutdown, Cybersecurity Preparedness and Critical Infrastructure. Now, let me give you a little bit of background. Considering the state of critical infrastructure cybersecurity today, Hollywood producers could have a Big Short movie on their hands. Like The Big Short, the size, the scale of known problems in the sector, including rising OT attacks, the ability to create mass disruption, geopolitical heat, and large-scale underpreparedness are a blockbuster script in the making. Think of it as the big shutdown, a perfect storm, cybersecurity gaps, enticing financial gains for ransomware criminals, power plays for nation-state threat actors, and the ability for broad disruption by everyday malicious hackers, with critical infrastructure organizations smack in the crosshairs. Big shutdown is looming, and the time to act is shortening. Now, today, I'm delighted to be joined by Dawn Capelli. She's a CISO at Rockwell Automation, one of the leaders in critical infrastructure security, and joined by retired General Gregory Toohill, a 25-year-plus veteran of the cybersecurity industry, having served as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Cybersecurity within DHS, and he was also President Obama's choice to serve as the first Chief Information Security Officer of the U.S. government. So today's talk is going to review highlights of a recent ISMG and Rockwell Automation survey titled Cybersecurity Preparedness and Critical Infrastructure. Knowing what you know, survey aside, what are your biggest concerns about critical infrastructure security today?
Well, of course, being at Rockwell Automation, I'm very concerned about OT cybersecurity. We, as CISO, I know that we have customers that are being impacted every day by ransomware. And when I talk to one of them, it's heartbreaking. I mean, the impact of ransomware in IT, of course, is serious. But when it impacts OT, the recovery is very complex. OT, for that reason, is being targeted by ransomware groups because they figured out the companies that run OT environments are much more likely to pay the ransom because it's much harder to recover and they can't tolerate downtime. So to me, that's my biggest concern is OT cybersecurity. It's way behind IT cybersecurity. IT security's been around. CERT was started in 1988. But OT is much less mature, and we've got to raise that bar quickly.
And we're still defining it for far too many people.
Right,
yeah.
Right.
General?
I agree with Don. You know, as we take a look at it just from the strictly landscape of the cyber ecosystem, where your data is and how much data you have, the vast majority of data that businesses, companies, government entities all have, that vast majority of data is actually with operational technology, industrial control systems, sensors, and other non-IT devices. So I think one of the biggest challenges for organizations around the world and around the nation is to recognize what kind of data they have, where it is, and the value of that data, and then protect proportionate to the risks that are out there. And expanding the aperture beyond IT is critically important because the way to best influence an organization is to hit them in their weak spot. And sadly, we don't think about OT, ICS, and IoT as a potential weak spot right now. We have target fixation on IT. That's got to change.
Although, I don't want to say that IT security is not important,
right,
because how do those ransomware attacks get into OT or get into the network? They come in through IT and then they traverse into OT. So I don't want to minimize the importance of IT security.
Agreed.
And just what we found in the survey, some basic cyber hygiene still is an issue for a lot of companies.
So I'm going to get into some survey results, but before I even do that, Do you believe that critical infrastructure is more vulnerable today than it was even 5 years ago?
The threats are worse. So if you look at risk, I think if we take a risk-based approach to it, the threats are much higher than they were. The vulnerabilities, I think, they may not have changed, and companies have made progress. I guess that's the good thing. Again, from
So do the adversaries.
Yes, that's the problem. But from Rockwell's perspective, I see that our security business has boomed because companies in ICS environments are taking security more seriously. Ever since NotPetya, they realized that, oh, wait a second, that stuff can impact us. We have to think about security too.
Where we were 5 years ago and where we are today, the landscape has changed. Well, as Don pointed out, you've got to take a look at the threat environment that's out there, and certainly the threat environment has matured in capability, but also intent. As we've taken a look at, for example, on December 23rd of 15, we saw an attack on the Ukrainian power grid to send a political message to the Ukrainians to shape behavior. And as we take a look at the status of our critical infrastructure ecosystem since those times, we've seen increased automation as we've hooked up more and more devices into our digital ecosystem. And we also have to recognize that a lot of our critical infrastructure is reliant on pumps, valves, switches, operational technology, some of which has been online and operating great for 30 plus years. So we've got the new, we've got the old, we've got the integrated, and now we have a threat actor set that is increasingly curious as how they can use that to shape attitudes, behaviors, and gain a competitive advantage. I think it's a time that we need to really take a step back as well as a look forward on how to better secure that ecosystem.
65% of respondents cite supply chain risk assessments happening less than quarterly. 16% are not yet planning to do it, a large security gap. Third-party risk has better awareness since the SolarWinds hack, certainly in 2020. However, these are hard to do, and some of the respondents say that their organizations decline to fund tooling and resources for this task. Rockwell, of course, can help with this step. But my question, Don, Greg, given everything we've just talked about, how did we get here?
You want me to start with that one?
Sure.
Yeah, I'll jump on that grenade right now. Well, first of all, before I go into answering that question, I want to state for ourselves as well as our audience that while it looks grim, there is hope. So let's not get too down on ourselves. And how we got here is rooted in trying to get things to work and get them to work well. And ultimately, the mission of these operational technologies, these industrial control systems, the Internet of Things, is to enhance the quality of life, to accelerate business, to really provide essential services to society. And when a lot of these different devices and the components that make up the systems that support operational technologies were created, ultimately you wanted to have safe operation to support the population. And security for a lot of these different devices was based on physical security and wasn't necessarily part of that automated network, but it's evolved with time. So now we've seen with the connection of things like remote monitoring and being able to sense changes and perturbations in the system, determining when things are operating within tolerance and when they're out of tolerance. Some of that was previously manually done. And with automation, we were able to reduce manpower workloads and the costs associated with that. We were enabling safety as well, making systems safer. But that introduces some additional risks, particularly from the cyber world. So, we got here with the best of intent. We've actually gotten better in serving the public with safe and secure critical infrastructure in many ways, but we also have introduced new patterns of risk that we need to now diagnose and find means of mitigating.
What I'm concerned about is the supply chain attacks, because the adversaries have realized if I can get into the supply chain, I can use them to get into those bigger companies that do have good, robust security programs. And small and medium-sized businesses, some of them don't even have IT departments, let alone a security team. So I think that that's something that we have to really focus on, is how can we help those small and medium businesses to do the basics like cyber hygiene, so that they protect our supply chain.
Well, SolarWinds put us on notice, didn't it? Because before, if you were a Rockwell Automation, you were a big company, you had a target on your back because you were Rockwell Automation. If you were big, if you had a political cause, if you were a major organization, you were targeted. SolarWinds says you're targeted not for who you are or what you do, but because of the technology that you use.
Well, and your customers. So we realized that in 2017 when NotPetya hit. We looked at how was this propagated through MEDOC, tax software company in the Ukraine. But they were the perfect target because their software was pushed out to all of their customers. So that was a way to get to the customer base. And we looked at that and said, wow, if they wanted to get into ICS, Rockwell would be the perfect product to compromise. So we've been looking at that from that perspective since 2017. I don't think the rest of the industry, especially in IT products, I don't think they thought of it that way until SolarWinds.
Yeah, and I agree. As we've taken a look at this, the research clearly indicates that the adversary sets are spending enormous amounts of resources to understand how our systems, how our networks are put together and operated at a level that pales in comparison to some of the knowledge of our own people. If I want to get into company A, often I don't try to kick in the door at company A, but rather go find out who are they doing business with? What kind of products and capabilities are they using? What kind of third-party partners do they have? What business-to-business relationships they have? Find the weak link, and that's where the adversaries are going to try to go. Find a seam, that's where the adversaries are going to go. And that's the cyber challenge for us right now, is helping particularly the small and medium businesses understand where those seams and those gaps and those weaknesses are.
And if you just look at Log4j and what happened with that, I'm pretty confident in saying that the big companies, bam, just kicked it into gear as soon as that vulnerability was announced. And I mean, I swear that's why I got sick over Christmas, was because Log4j did it to me.
The gift that kept on giving.
Yeah, we worked around the clock.
It was the Grinch incident
Yes.
for us in the holidays.
But I do worry about small and medium companies because they're just as exposed by Log4j as anyone else. And I will bet you there are a lot of companies out there that have no idea what Log4j means. And it all kind of goes back to supply chain. So after NotPetya happened, as I said, we realized we could be used as the vector to get to our customers. But we also realized our suppliers could be used as a vector to get to us.
Yep.
So we expanded our third-party risk program to include our software supply chain. And we started looking at those suppliers and requiring that they have an SDLC. So we've always looked at the security of our suppliers. We have a third-party risk program that does that. But now we realized we have to take it another step. We have to look and make sure that they are developing secure software. And part of that is the open source software community. And there are tools out there that you can purchase that you can use to analyze your open source software, and that will give you an automated SBOM for your open source whenever you're ready to release a product. So that's one that's fairly easy to fix.
It strikes me that the message to all these groups is we're all defenders. We're vulnerable through our IT, we're vulnerable through our OT, through our software, through our people. We're all defending the same enterprise.
Right, and it's not just the enterprise, it's the whole ecosystem. And we're all in this together. And
Right.
I think that's the thing when you see survey results like this. I think we can't look down our nose and say, oh my gosh, why aren't people doing that? We have to look at it instead and say, okay, how can we work together to help raise the bar for the whole community?
You know what we're going to talk about now, Don? How are we going to fund it?
There's a limited amount of resources out there, and in every business, whether it's a small or medium business or a major corporation or even in the government, there's a finite amount of resources and there's a competition for those resources. And I find, and I serve as the chair of the board of directors at ISACA, for example, and I've served on boards prior to joining the Software Engineering Institute. We take a look at things from the standpoint of risk, and then we work to apportion our resources based upon risk decisions. I think within the cyber community, to some extent, we haven't done the best job we can in being able to demonstrate where the return on investment is. Putting things in terms of risk and resilience in our proposals to say, okay, we have this issue here, we need funding to go do this, and here's the desired or anticipated outcome. Folks are understanding that cybersecurity really is no longer just a technology issue. It's a business imperative. It's a technology-enabled operational function, and as a result, it's part of the enterprise risk management program. And we're seeing more and more companies that are investing in cybersecurity, but also in evaluating cybersecurity as part of that enterprise risk management issue. We've got a long way to go, though,
Sure.
but I think we're pointing in the right direction and trending up.
You know, the big companies that are in the news, you can get their SEC filings and now you have data. And in OT in particular, any company that runs OT, manufacturing environments, they know exactly how much they're going to lose if their plant is down for 1 day, 2 days, 1 week, 1 month. They know how much that equates to. So the return on investment, which in security we always said, how do you do a return on investment? Well, now it's becoming easier because we have that data and we can use it. I think it's the smaller companies that have, again, I hate to keep harping on that, but we don't
like I
see
said,
them in the news.
You're an IT savvy organization, but your customers aren't necessarily.
Right, and you know, I guess for them, getting their board to recognize this isn't just hitting JBS and Colonial Pipeline.
Right.
This is hitting lots of small companies. They just don't make the news. And so, you know, that's where I think it's tough, is getting boards of smaller companies on board.
Well, and I'm also seeing the rise of the managed security services providers, companies that can provide a centralized security apparatus for those small and medium businesses. And a lot of companies are saying, hey, I'm over my head on this. Who can I contract with that can help me out at economies of scale to get me to a point of acceptable risk in a very contentious cyber environment? And there's a lot of great MSSPs that are out there, as most folks refer to these managed security service providers. But you also have to understand, choose wisely and choose your partners wisely, because like we saw with SolarWinds, adversaries are also looking at those MSSPs as potential gateways into businesses. But that said, folks in the industry are very collaborative. They're very cued in from the standpoint of risk. And if you are a small and medium business that feels like you're outgunned or you don't have access to the manpower or the tools or the budget, an MSSP is a really good way of offsetting some of those risks. But you have to understand that when it comes to risk, you're never going to get risk to zero. At some point, you have to make informed decisions as far as what kind of risk can I assume that's within budget and keep my business going.
So the job is risk management, not risk elimination.
That's correct.
You know, along the MSSP route, that's why Rockwell just recently announced a Cybersecurity Operations Center, a CSOC that we're offering for our customers because of the demand.
Right.
And it was because we have some large customers that use MSSPs, and they say, there's no way I'm going to let that MSSP touch my manufacturing environment. They know nothing about OT. I don't want them to touch it. So Rockwell, you know security, you know OT, you're the perfect provider. And then we have small and medium-sized businesses that are saying, we just need somebody to help us secure our plants. And so Rockwell, can you help us with that? Mm-hmm. So it was a niche, a gap that the community was calling out for us to fill. So it's kind of interesting because, you know, a few years ago we were touting you need to integrate your IT and OT SOC into one and use your IT security team, but we found that no, it doesn't really work for everybody. Some companies, yes, but not for everyone.
Yeah, and from a government standpoint, you know, as we're providing some advice and counsel to the Department of Defense on the emerging capability maturity model for cyber effort that they're doing, the CMMC. And I think it's kind of a late to need program, but better late than never. One of the things that I think that the Department of Defense and government writ large needs to do as they're looking at CMMC and efforts like that is think beyond just IT. I think we still have a mindset of IT only with these maturity model initiatives that are going on. We really need to think of the holistic cyber ecosystem, the digital ecosystem that underpins these providers to government and the military. And further, if I'm running a business, I want to know with my supply chain, my partners that are out there, what are you all doing to better protect my data that you can become the custodian of if I do business with? So it's really a heady topic that is now starting to come out of the server room and into the boardroom where it belongs.
I want to go through a couple of the survey stats with you and get your response to them. Let's start with this question here. So the question was whether business critical systems have been identified and prioritized. As they used to say on the TV show, survey said just over 56% say they have this in place. What does it say to you if almost half of the respondents don't have that in place?
Well, that's concerning. You know, with the prevalence of ransomware today, I think companies have to be prepared. We might get hit. And if we get hit, where are you going to start? You can't figure that out at the time of crisis.
If in fact you're taking a holistic look at your business and 56% say, yeah, I'm touching on that right now, that's dreadfully low. I think really we need to be working across our business communities to help them understand here's what you should be looking at to understand the value to your business, and then further recognize that you're going to have lots of different systems out there that are going to extend much beyond IT, but to also include your operational technology, industrial controls, et cetera. And then further, from a risk management standpoint, you're going to have to prioritize. Every military person knows that when you're under attack, you go and you defend based upon risk, and you know what your high-value assets are. I think it's critically important, regardless of what sector you are in critical infrastructure, government, or even the military. Understanding your high-value assets and then building your game plan around that is critically important.
Back in 2013, when I started at Rockwell, we had a third-party risk program. And we identified our critical suppliers that we cared about from a third-party risk perspective as those that have access to our confidential or proprietary restricted information or access to our network systems information or facilities. That was it. Then after NotPetya, we realized, oh wait, we probably care about more than that. So we started thinking about SaaS providers. And then we started thinking about our software supply chain, our product supply chain. Then as ransomware started hitting, we had small suppliers of our, they provided components for our products. They didn't have access to our information. They didn't have access to our network. They provided hard, things. And all of a sudden, though, they were being taken out by ransomware and would get a letter saying, we'll be down for at least a month, maybe more. So we had to expand the definition of our third-party risk program again. And it just keeps expanding and expanding. So I look at the data from this question, how often is a supply chain risk assessment performed? Only 35% said on an ongoing basis. You're onboarding a new vendor, make sure that you are doing a security risk assessment of that company. And that includes any vendor. You're bringing in their application, you're putting your data, you're using their SaaS solution, you're using their components in your plants. That supply chain risk assessment component is just, that's top of mind right now after SolarWinds and Log4j.
Absolutely, and as an exclamation point on this, when I was serving at DHS as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Cyber and Comms, our U.S. CERT teams would go out there along with the broader ecosystem of computer emergency response teams, and we get target fixation on the malicious actors, but the data clearly indicated that the vast majority of cyber incidents were related not necessarily to malicious actors, but what I call the careless, negligent, indifferent, or confounded employee. And folks that aren't properly installing, configuring, or maintaining systems properly, you leave the back door open for somebody.
Given everything we've talked about today, what is your advice about what organizations can do to significantly move the needle forward?
Well, I hate to repeat myself, but NIST Cybersecurity Framework, it's free, it's out there, it's used by most large companies to create their strategic roadmaps and to, on an ongoing basis, reassess what are our highest risks. It basically gives you the comprehensive checklist so that you know you're not overlooking something. So I think that companies should start with that, or if you've done it years ago and haven't done it recently, do it again because the environment is always changing. So use the NIST CSF so that you can assess your risk in IT and OT if you have an OT environment.
I agree with Don. I think the NIST cybersecurity framework, which we all contributed to, this is not just the Department of Commerce saying it. This was a crowdsourced activity, identifying leading practices that identify, protect, detect, respond, recover construct of the core functions of the cybersecurity framework is brilliant in identifying and characterizing your risks writ large. I think also, the next step beyond that is start thinking like a hacker as you are evaluating your risk environment. Think about how vulnerable are we, what's the impact, and what kind of risk exposure we have. And the third step is ask for help. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of wisdom. And bringing in somebody to go help with an independent third-party look at your posture turns out to be a pretty good return on investment for most organizations out there.
General Toohill, Don Capelli, I am delighted to have this opportunity to sit here and talk with you today. The first time in 2 years we aren't doing this virtually, we're doing this actually. It really is a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time, for your insight.
Thanks, Tom.
You.
So I want to thank you all for taking time to be a part of this production today. To close, let me tell you that Rockwell has got years of industrial cybersecurity experience with the ability to organize cybersecurity steps around, as Don said, the NIST framework. Rockwell also uses zero trust strategies with a protect surface approach to help secure critical business networks, data, assets, applications, and related systems. So to learn more, you can go to rockwellautomation.com for a self-assessment to benchmark your own progress against These survey respondents, cybersecurity planning template also, or any expert advice on industrial cybersecurity. Thank you so much again for being part of the show today. For Information Security Media Group, I'm Tom Field. Thank you so much for your time, for your attention.